So good morning and welcome everybody. Welcome Yuriko. We have here with us, we are lucky enough. This is one of for those of you that are assisting this conference instead of the whole, the 3 days, this is one of the keynote speakers of a conference that is called, that is Arte, Vida, that is part of the Society of Aesthetics and Theory of Arts of Spain and Portugal. And then every year we have a conference 1 year in Spain and another one in Portugal. But then we are happy enough to host Yuriko Saito, which is the expert in everyday aesthetics.
No.
The worldwide expert in everyday aesthetics. She wrote a book in 2007 in Oxford University Press that is Everyday Aesthetics, then another one that is Aesthetics of the Familiar, and then another one that is Aesthetics of Care. The common ground is aesthetics, but then it's moving also from everyday to care, back and forth, which is interesting. And today she's going to be presenting in a conference our relationship with everyday objects and how do we care everyday objects, how they take care of us also at the same time, how can we also take care of each other through the objects in a daily life. So thank you very much, Yuriko, for being here. We are really happy and excited to have you here and looking forward to your conference. Thank you.
Thank you. First, I want to express my gratitude for inviting me to this conference and this university. I owe special thanks to Professor Raquel Cascales for inviting me. It goes back about a year ago. I guess we started corresponding. And all her colleagues, many of you sitting here, including Javier, have been a good caregiver for me. So I really feel being well taken care of. I do apologize. My presentation will be in English. I wish I knew Spanish to be able to give it, but I don't. And so that's why I have been in and out of various sessions, just picking English presentations. So I feel rude about leaving in the middle of the session, but that's the reason why. Okay, so I'm going to start. I will have tons of slides, outline and quoted passages and visuals. Okay, I would like to begin by imagining a good society in which to live. I believe most of us would want the protection of various rights, equality and inclusivity, political participation, economic security, education, meaningful work, access to medical care, and healthy living environment. However, no matter how well a societal structure protects and promotes our well-being and how well everyone carries out duties toward each other, the quality of life can remain rather poor if we remain solitary individuals and our social relationships are not motivated by care. A society where no egregiously immoral acts occur, but neither do human interactions expressive of care, is certainly preferable to the Hobbesian state of nature, but I doubt our lives there will be satisfying or fulfilling. Care is commonly understood as an ethical practice with a concern and empathic attitude toward others that generally leads to an action to protect and promote their well-being. We develop care relationship commonly with other humans, but with the development of environmental ethics, the care community now includes nature. However, care discourse rarely addresses artifacts, particularly ordinary everyday objects, unlike works of art, historically significant objects, and prominent historical art built structures which tend to garner people's attention for their care, such as preservation and restoration. Another unexplored aspect of care is its intimate relationship with aesthetics, which I believe is indispensable to care practice. In this presentation, I explore our care relationship with everyday objects and argue that care is both an aesthetically guided ethical practice and an ethically grounded aesthetic practice. Let's see, oops, okay. So, wait. Can I can do this one.
Let me try.
Okay, what did I do wrong? This is the button, right? Yeah, okay. Whoops, wait. Okay, stay there. As I go along, I will give you outline. The blue is indicated where we are. So first, let me briefly present what I believe to be a remarkable parallel between aesthetic experience and care relationship with others. In contrast to the justice-centric ethics that promotes generality, rule-governedness, and universality, care ethics focuses on the singularity of the person and the situation involved. The aesthetic experience also emerges from a first-hand grasp of the singular object's unique characteristics. I also need to be open-minded in understanding the other's reality without imposing my preconceived idea or desire. In caring for the other, I try to be responsive to their needs understood from their perspective. In aesthetic experience, I approach the object by bracketing my personal stake and letting the object take the lead. In both care ethics and aesthetic experience, I listen to what the other has to say and respond accordingly. Listening here, however, is not passive reception. As John Dewey points out, the surrender or yielding involved in the process of an aesthetic experience is possible only through controlled activity that may well be intense. This active undergoing is complemented by imaginative and creative engagement as we improvise the most effective way of experiencing the object. Similarly, in carrying out a care act for a person, I exercise my imaginative power to envision her experience with sensibility and sensitivity. These considerations expected to caregivers and agents of aesthetic experience invite reciprocity, not as a quid pro quo, but as a sign of grateful acknowledgement, provided the care recipients are capable of understanding my care. Of course, genuine care is given without expecting anything in return, but a perpetual one-way street of caregiving without even minimal acknowledgement, like a smile, is unhealthy and exacerbates the role stereotypically played by women. Similarly, a fulfilling aesthetic experience is possible when my readiness to engage is rewarded by the object. This brief sketch shows that both the successful care relationship and aesthetic experience involve attention to the particularity of the other, open-minded responsiveness, imaginative engagement, and some kind of reciprocity. Our aesthetic experience typically occurs with art and environments, but as Arnold Bellion makes clear in his social aesthetics, environment includes human interactions. Although proposed as an aesthetic mode of experiencing others, I believe Bellion's social aesthetics also characterizes care relationships. They both require perceptual acuity for a sympathetic understanding of the other, responding with sensibility and sensitivity, developing collaborative relationships, or leading to manifestations in bodily expressions. One of the founders of care ethics, Nell Noddings, points out, I cannot claim to care for my relative if my caretaking is perfunctory or grudging. Although there is a possibility that the bodily expression of care is a mere performance, practicing body aesthetics is an important part of moral education, as taught by Confucius. What I propose is that this social relationship should extend to our everyday objects. They are commonly regarded as mere instruments to serve our practical needs. As such, we tend to take them for granted as an extension of ourselves, what Heidegger calls ready to hand. Only when they break or malfunction do we become aware of their own reality, Heidegger's present at hand. The second formulation of Kant's categorical imperative that we should not treat persons merely as a means to an end seems to imply that it is acceptable to treat objects that way. If we have a duty not to mistreat them by wantonly destroying them, for example, it is because of the harm inflicted on their owners and users. But should this assumption regarding objects go unchallenged? We tend to pride ourselves as autonomous beings exercising free will and agency, unlike those inert objects which are brought into existence and operated by us. But we depend on them like we depend on other people in our management of everyday life. As such, Don't they deserve due attention, grateful appreciation, and respect from us? What happens if we experience them as willing partners who help us negotiate the world and accomplish tasks? Let's consider Yanagi Soet's characterization of objects. He's a Japanese art historian who established the Minge folk craft movement after rapid westernization began in the late 19th century. To think of them as nothing but physical objects would be an error. They may simply be things, but who can say they don't have a heart? Forbearance, wholesomeness, and sincerity, aren't these virtues witnesses to the fact that everyday objects have a heart? He describes their way of being in the world with us as loyal companions and faithful friends who work thoughtlessly and unselfishly, carrying out effortlessly and inconspicuously whatever duty comes their way. Their presence and their usefulness offer an expression of humility. Or consider this poem entitled The Patience of Ordinary Things by an American poet, Pat Schneider. It is a kind of love, is it not? How the cup holds a tea, how the chair stands sturdy and foursquare, how the floor receives the bottoms of shoes or toes, how soles of feet know where they are supposed to be. I've been thinking about the patience of ordinary things, how clothes wait respectfully in closets, and soap dries quietly in the dish, and towels drink the wet from the skin of the back, and the lovely repetition of stairs, and what is more generous than the window. Finally, consider the description of everyday objects designed by Finnish designer Tapio Virkala. When an object designed by Virkala touches the hands or lips, a pleasing tactic encounter is ensured by the form and material. An inviting knife grip is like a warm handshake, just as a well-designed doorknob is like a welcome sign calling one to enter. Should we dismiss these characterizations of things as an anthropomorphism, a quaint form of animism, or a category mistake? I suggest that they are not making an ontological claim regarding things, but rather proposing how we should relate to them. Yanagi's characterization of companions and friends implies a relationship between us and things. If they are our friends, we need to honor and appreciate the relationship by treating them with respect and care. By describing the way in which things of daily use patiently serve us, Schneider is encouraging us to experience the world from their perspective, that is, doing things to help us. Virkala's cups, knives, and doorknobs are inviting us to engage with them. We develop a relationship with these faithful and patient partners. Following these writers' leads, I suggest that the objects of daily use can be regarded as dispensing care for us in our management of daily life. Of course, some objects can work against us, such as poorly designed objects or those which are created specifically to damage our well-being, such as torture devices and assault weapons, but we simply don't develop care relationship with them. My discussion of everyday objects so far lacks specific aesthetic dimensions, but by making their presence and their care for us visible, I am providing a foundation for their aesthetics of care. Let me start, a little early. Let me start with some examples, mostly but not exclusively from Japan. As I divide my time between the US and Japan, I find that Japanese cultural tradition and contemporary life offer a rich reservoir of object-mediated expression of care. The first set of examples provides aesthetic delight beyond fulfilling their primary functions. Perhaps the most prominent is a picture-perfect presentation of food, not only in the kind served in restaurants, but also in home cooking. This is not quite home cooking, but this is a New Year's dish served to at my mother's facility. She lives in a senior citizens facility. So, I mean, this is a little bit more fancy than usual, but I can attest that everyday, dish looks something like this. It's pretty amazing. Another example is meandering pathways for residential entrances gardens, following one of the garden-making principles handed down from the 11th century. Strolling on these paths offers us delightful experience with constantly changing viewpoints and unfolding scenes. In addition to irregular placement, stepping stones with diverse shapes and colors and textures also enrich the experience of walking. What is underfoot is not a common object for ocular-centric aesthetic experience or from erect posture, but there are bountiful opportunities for urban strollers to gain aesthetic delight. Many municipalities in Japan adorn their manhole covers with images evocative of their sense of place. This is Osaka. You can see all kinds of intricate castle design and so on. This Tokyo. The left one is in the park, renowned for cherry blossoms. And this is my hometown, Sapporo, known for beer. but also we have all kinds of different kinds of manhole covers. So, the subway corridor leading to a zoo enhances the children's excitement of visiting different animals. This underfoot aesthetics is found outside of Japan as well. So these are from United States, Phoenix, Seattle, Portland. And I discovered that Italy has even a town dedicated to displaying all kinds of manhole covers. This inlaid and at times whimsical pattern depicting the journey of salmon on the corridor floor of Seattle Tacoma Airport welcomes the visitor with its sense of place and culture and breaks up the monotony of walking. You can see someone, carrying suitcase, and then somehow it morphs into an airplane. Boston Logan Airport features sea creatures, reminding the visitors of the nearby aquarium. These objects could have easily fulfilled their primary function without providing aesthetic enjoyment. The manhole covers could have featured generic geometric patterns just to prevent slippage, and the entrance path could have been a straight pavement. As such, I think our experience of them go beyond simply appreciating the attractive appearance to the extra care given in enriching people's aesthetic life. In comparison, the almost total lack of care is glaringly evident in the Providence train station, which I use all the time, with very few signage indicating where it is, which way is New York or Boston, let alone any sign of welcoming visitors or sense of place. It's a disgrace. The examples so far do not require extreme attentiveness or sensibility to note the aesthetic gifts offered or denied. Furthermore, we don't engage with them physically by using the way we typically do in the next set of examples. So these, the left side, the airline counter and the ATM machine, the money machine, you can see the shelf sticking out. And this is where you can put your pocketbook or coat or whatever while tending to what you have to do. And I was giving a presentation last summer at University of Birmingham, and I was giving sort of like an object-mediated expression of care. And as soon as I walked into the hotel on campus, that's the right side, there's that little shelf sticking out. So I thought, yes. So I immediately took a photo, and then I included that in the presentation. Okay, and subway hanging straps. If you notice, it's got different lengths, and that's to accommodate tall people and people like me. These the little green half circle, that's to put the cane. The left side, you see the umbrella stand. And I noticed yesterday, you have the umbrella plastic bag dispenser. So it's the same idea. So the left is this was a bank, and then the next one is post office, and the next one is ATM machine. ATM machine even have a coffee cup holder. I think that's excessive, but. And public bathroom is equipped with a baby seat. And I raised 2 children, and every summer we spent in Japan. And when I was raising them, we didn't have this. And what do you do when you have to go to the bathroom holding a baby? Okay, you get the picture. This is the pajama series, which is geared for people with dexterity problems, like senior citizens. And my mother's pajamas are featured on the images. So the buttons are usually bigger, and if you notice, the buttonholes are slanted, and that makes it for really easy buttoning and unbuttoning. And OXO Peter. So this vegetable Peter is a redesign of the conventional metal Peter by a designer who watched his wife with severe arthritis struggle with it. Akiko Bush characterizes the OXO Peter's specific design as instruments not simply of food preparation, but of human behavior, coordinates that can help us calibrate our place in human relations. They can be the small agents of human decency, embodying consideration, empathy, and comfort. These objects do not stand out for providing aesthetic delight the way stepping stones and manhole covers do. In addition, care expressed by these objects tend to be invisible to those who don't have special needs due to compromised dexterity, short stature, difficulty with walking, and carrying a baby. Similar invisibility is further illustrated by the hostility mediated by the object's design features, sometimes called hostile architecture, defensive architecture, callous objects, or obstinate objects. These anti-sleep benches and skate stoppers to prevent the skateboarders from skating like these appear innocuous enough. Their deterrence of homeless people and skateboarders remains invisible to those who use them for their primary function of sitting, and their curvy shape may even be appreciated for elegance. If we attend to our everyday environment with a sharpened perception, we realize that many of its parts pose challenges to the marginalized population, often with special needs. One critic points out that part of what may prevent us from seeing the politics built into the world around us is the basic fact that we are each limited by our own personal history of experience. What each person knows is limited by the fact that she is an individual body in the world with a particular vantage point and a particular restricted set of life experiences. This invokes the need for exercising sympathetic imagination, an indispensable part of the care relationship, as well as aesthetic experience. I had to show you a couple of artistic intervention, how to deal with this hostile architecture. Okay. And this one was a sort of a public art project near Washington, D.C., where the public the officers of the public around there decided to get rid of all the benches because of homeless population sleeping on them. And so this artist with the other assistants reinstalled the benches and invited the public to write on the bench what they used the park for. Eventually, they were taken away again. But you can see the kind of like, the battle going on through the object. Okay, so those are the examples. Now, my claim that objects express care and thoughtfulness or indifference and even hostility will be sure to invite objections. First, one may point out that strictly speaking, moral qualities like caring or indifference cannot be attributed to objects themselves. Such attribution requires agency, typically exercised by humans. So if we say that an object expresses care or indifference, we must be referring to the designer's attitude or intention. Despite the lack of the same kind of agency exercised by humans, we can consider object of care to have a different kind of agency for shaping our actions or determining the character of the experience. Oops, wait, did I miss that? Okay, sorry. The anti-sleep bench literally prevents people from lying down, while the cane holder lets people rest their canes. At other times, even if we don't use the objects per se, like those things underfoot, they determine the character of our experience. If agency in the sense explained can be attributed to artifacts, it is not far-fetched to endow them with moral qualities and evaluate them accordingly. Unlike in the case of most art, we usually don't know the designer, let alone his intentional capability. Our judgment is strictly based upon its sensuous features. So objects can embody these moral attributes through their sensuous features insofar as they make our life a little bit easier and pleasant, or at times frustrating. One may further object that the easy usability of utilitarian object is a practical but not an aesthetic matter. This line of criticism may invoke the notion of disinterestedness as a hallmark of aesthetic experience, which makes easy usability aesthetically irrelevant. I have three responses to this objection. First, following Kant's dependent beauty and Alan Carson and Glenn Parsons' notion of functional beauty, an object's functionality needs to be referred to in determining elegance, gracefulness, looking powerful, looking fit, and the like. We can certainly bracket conceptual considerations regarding functionality to experience a utilitarian object purely for its sensuous features. But in our daily life, we typically experience it as an object of use, and its aesthetics cannot but include its functionality, including easy usability. Second, if we appreciate the object strictly for its user-friendliness, it does seem to lack aesthetic dimension. But I believe that the appreciation becomes aesthetic insofar as we attend to the way in which, we attend to the way in which the way in which the parts are put together thoughtfully for smooth operation. In this sense, we may distinguish the cane holder and baby seat from other examples because the care embodied in them is derived primarily from their presence and placement, rather than the specific design features which could have been otherwise, such as in the case of OXO Peter and pajama buttons. Third, my most general and overall response is that we manage our daily life by negotiating various concerns that often overlap and merge. Separating them as moral, aesthetic, and practical risks compromising the complex and often messy and entangled reality of lived experience. I agree with Marsha Eaton, who points out that our experience, our encounters with and in the world, and the decisions we make as a result do not typically come in separate packets, with the moral, aesthetic, economic, religious, political, scientific, and so on, serving as viewing stands distance from one another, so that we look at the world first from one and then from another standpoint. With respect to everyday objects, we have been considering the moral values like care and thoughtfulness are brought about by the design features, and the embodiment of these moral values in turn enhances their aesthetic appeal already in existence, or constitutes a different kind of aesthetic appeal, even in the absence of sheer sensuous appeal. I regard the relationship between the aesthetic and the ethical in these cases to be interdependent and mutually enhancing. So far, I have discussed how objects care for us by serving our needs and often expressing their care aesthetically. But how do we care for them to sustain the reciprocal care relationship? Clearly, I should take care not to damage or destroy them. This negative duty seems to receive more attention from those who advocate the ethically grounded engagement with the artifactual world. For example, when arguing for gentleness, even toward mere things, as a general mode of being in the world, Simon James states that if someone routinely and gratuitously breaks, chips, rips, shatters, splinters, and dents inanimate things, we judge that such a person must have fallen short of the ideal of moral goodness. Similarly, in her discussion of the moral considerability of artifacts, Magdalena Holly-Lucas also emphasizes that the key to morally proper behavior entails the elimination of actions that lead to destroying things. However, missing from the discussion are many proactive things we also can do to care for the objects: cleaning, washing, polishing, refreshing, and repairing. These care activities for objects tend to remain invisible, paralleling the invisibility of well-functioning everyday objects. But cleaning and maintenance work are indispensable for the society's smooth operation. In places like offices, hospitals, and schools, we expect everything is cleaned and in working order and the garbage taken away. We become painfully aware that these maintenance activities when the cleaning crew and garbage collectors go on strike. Just as a side note, when I was growing up in Japan, all the cleaning of the school, the classroom, desks, and even toilet were done by students. We didn't have janitors. So that sort of instills in you some different kind of attitude. So some art projects highlight these invisible acts of care and maintenance. A classic example is an American artist, Miele Laraman Yukere's maintenance art that starts with her manifesto for maintenance art, proposal for an exhibition care, and consists of performance and installation pieces with the New York City's sanitation department. Maintenance work, Yukeres complains, is a drag. It takes all the fucking time. The mind boggles and chefs at the boredom. The culture confers lousy status on maintenance jobs, minimum wages, housewives, no pay. But she asks rhetorically, and this is my favorite quote, after the revolution, who's going to pick up the garbage on Monday morning? Her work ballet performed by actual garbage collectors help eliminate and dignify such invisible and detested activities of everyday life. Ramiro Gomez also highlights domestic help, gardeners, garbage collectors, and road repair crew, while Vic Munet's film documents garbage picking of the world's biggest garbage dump at the outskirts of Rio de Janeiro. And finally, Ku Has House Life documents the hardships as well as resilience, ingenuity, and patience of a cleaning lady who is tasked to clean an unusual house Rem Ku has designed for a French family. This is really a funny and kind of disturbing film, and I highly recommend it. It is really funny how she, goes about cleaning. These art projects help redistribute the sensible by highlighting the invisible care works, but we relate to them as spectators. When we think of doing these works ourselves, there remains a lingering feeling that they are a necessary evil of living in and with the material world. Aren't we better off if we are relieved of these care activities altogether? Let's imagine the material version of the Platonic world suggested by Elizabeth Spellman, where things never broke, never frayed, never splintered or fell to pieces. So it is filled with unchanging, unbreakable, eternal objects. In fact, another scholar who is a self-proclaimed lover of cracks was asked by a reporter to comment on the idea of self-cleaning and self-healing objects. The reporter was referencing the rapid advancement in material science, which makes this idea more than a science fiction fantasy. We certainly welcome this possibility for things like airplanes and bridges, but the primary concern with them is safety, and we as non-professionals cannot work on their maintenance and repair. But what about objects from our everyday life that we can maintain and repair without much specialized knowledge or skill? In the hypothetical world under consideration, we certainly gain freedom from much of our house chores. Furthermore, we can reduce the sites of exploitation and oppression, given the fact that such tasks are most often carried out by women and socially marginalized population. But does this make our lives better? Despite the freedom we gain, I submit that we compromise our aesthetic lives and ultimately our mode of being in the world. Let me explore 3 such losses. Oops. Okay. So first, our aesthetic palette will become severely curtailed by the unchanging appearance of the objects, as everything will stay brand new. Dewey goes so far as to claim that aesthetic experience is impossible in a world that is finished, ended, because it would have no traits of suspense and crisis and would offer no opportunity for resolution. Where everything is already complete, there is no fulfillment. Our attitude toward the old appearance of objects due to aging, wear and tear, and accidental damage is complex. On the one hand, as pointed out by David Lowenthal, the balance of evidence shows general dislike of age and decay. Media theorist Stephen Jackson characterizes today's consumer attitude as a productionist bias or production-centered ethos, which determines the identity of an industrially produced object as the end of its production process, rendering any later changes to its mint condition a deterioration, a fall from grace. Except for things like jeans and carpentry tools, there is certainly an aesthetic appeal of the shiny surface of an object free of dents and scratches. However, the productionist bias tends to minimize other kinds of aesthetics because today's industry strategy of aesthetic obsolescence nudges consumer to replace old-looking objects with newer, defect-free products. But there are plenty of examples that celebrate the aged appearance of the objects, 18th century British picturesque, Japanese wabi aesthetics, and the appeal of what Alois Riegel calls age values. There is no denying that the aged appearance can enrich our aesthetic lives, and the hypothetical world of unchanging objects severely limits the scope of the aesthetic palette. The self-cleaning and self-repairing objects obviate the need for their care, and this leads to the second kind of aesthetic loss. A significant part of our care activities regarding objects is spent on their repair. This task is both practical and aesthetic. The conventionally preferred mode is invisible repair that makes the signs of damage and subsequent repair as inconspicuous as possible. We thus use transparent glue, color-matched paint, fabric, and yarn. Invisible repair can achieve remarkable results as seen in the mended fabrics displayed in the museum exhibited at my university. Can you see where the mending occurred? Okay. How about this one? It's harder, but yeah. So it is a challenge to find mended parts, and we marvel at the considerable skills involved in such meticulous and exquisite results. But implied in invisible repair is an aesthetic judgment that the original appearance of an object is superior to its later changed appearance. However, instead of trying to arrest the process of change and restore their original appearance, what happens if we develop a relationship with the objects at each stage of their changes and let them invite us to interact with them for how they are? We continue the object's history through its own aging process and our interaction with it, considering each stage to exhibit a unique characteristic rather than compromising or damaging the original integrity of the object. We grow together by co-creating an ongoing story and history of life's journey. Today's repair activists, whether professionals, amateurs, or artists, highlight such a relationship by practicing visible repair. Once we regard the changes the objects undergo as their unfolding story, the signs of so-called damage or defect suggest a different state of the object in its continuing existence rather than a fall from grace. Those signs become a springboard for creativity and imagination, as seen in some contemporary art projects. young foreman's dispatch work, the middle ones, repairs a crumbling edifice of brick structures with colorful Lego pieces, sometimes with area residents' collaboration. I don't think it's a real like structural repair, but I think he's just trying to make a point. Rachel Sussman on the left side, sidewalk kintsukuroi, her project appropriates the Japanese kintsugi method in repairing sidewalk cracks by filling them with gold-colored paint. And Charlotte Bailey wraps a broken vase with fabric of the same pattern and sews the pieces with gold threads. Many artists are inspired by the Japanese repair practice called kintsugi, gold joinery, or kintsukuroi, repair by gold, associated with tea ceremony and wabi aesthetics. Kintsugi accentuates the individuality of a particular object and its unique history by presenting a tangible record that the owner, the user, the repairer cared enough about the object to take the time and effort to give it a renewed life. The specific characteristics of the object with so-called damage are attended to with respect, and the repairer collaborates with the object and honors its own history and his entanglement with it. However, even with our best efforts to foster the longevity of the objects and our lives with them, there comes a time when they can no longer serve us. We then have no choice but to dispose of them or recycle them. But we can do so with gratitude for their long service to us, as in the traditional Japanese ritual of kuyo for needles, knives, scissors, dolls, and now stamp seals and cell phones. Of course, this ritual is culture specific, but the ethos behind it does not have to be limited to Japan. Maria Kondo, a Japanese guru for tidying up, does encourage us to dispose of or give away things that do not spark joy in our lives anymore. But she also recommends showing our gratitude and wishing them a bon voyage with a hearty salute, thanking them for having found us and share their lives with us. So the idea is not this particular, a special ritual and so on, but just the ethos behind it, rather than just a stuffed junk to throw away. You sort of, thank them for their service. So finally, there is an aesthetic dimension of doing involved in the care activity for the material world, which would be lost in the imaginary world we have been considering. In our daily life, rather than remaining spectators, more often than not, we engage in the work ourselves. Those chores are often performed mechanically to achieve a predetermined goal without much involvement of interest in the process and experience. But I believe that it can be an experience par excellence in the Deweyan sense. There is a continuous back and forth between undergoing and doing as we attend to the specificity of the object and its condition. As we rub the stain off the carpet, iron a shirt, and sew a patch over the rip on the pants, we adjust our body movement constantly to respond to how the object responds to our action. Although there are general rules to follow, we need to improvise our action according to the materials dictate. We perform a kind of collaborative dance. One fabric mender states, responding to each individual repair as the garment demands means that every patch, stitch, darn, or combinations of mending techniques can be in response to that particular damage. Joined by another mender who observes, rather than having a predetermined vision of the finished garment, we let the contours of the damage dictate the repair. Finally, mending fabric occurs when this active space of attending, assessing, touching, thinking, intuiting, entwines into an embodied knowledge, a soft technique, during which the ameliorative thread is sewn this way and that. Though rarely articulated or reflected upon, caring for the material world requires investment of the whole body, guided not only by practical concerns, but also by aesthetic considerations. The long-held spectator-oriented aesthetics discourse has not paid enough attention to this aesthetics of doing things because there is no object to speak of, and the experience is thought to remain private and lacking a possibility for any kind of judgment. However, the recent interest in soma aesthetics sheds light on the significance of mindful attention to bodily engagement, and phenomenologically oriented aesthetics promotes a descriptive rather than a judgmental discourse. In addition, some recent art projects involve participants' actual engagement in activities, inviting their attention to the aesthetic dimension of doing things. If aesthetics is limited to spectator-like experiences, a large swath of our lived experience will be left outside of aesthetics. At the same time, we can share experiences in a group activity or through imaginary participation in the similar experiences narrated by others, like those given by the fabric mentors. It is noteworthy that writings on laundry often reflect upon the connection the women feel with the same tasks performed throughout history and across the globe. The lifting, holding, pinning, and folding connects me to the generation of women who came before me, those who had fewer choices in their chores. And over the years, I have come to realize that throughout shocking political cultural upheavals, one thing that connects women over the generations is the making and tending of cloth. So in conclusion, I started this presentation by thinking of the necessary ingredients of a good society. I suggest that a good life there should include creating, appreciating, and caring for everyday objects that care for us. We develop a mutually supportive relationship, share our lives together, and grow all together. Commitment to living with them as our life companions that care for us and in turn are cared by us is particularly pressing today as an antidote to rampant consumerism and disposable culture. Aesthetics plays a critical role both in recognizing and appreciating the objects care for us and in guiding our care activities for them. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Yuriko.
Thank you.
I think it was really fantastic. And also I was wondering that being in a conference that is about aesthetics, many times most of the people, especially the people that are not related with aesthetics in general, we think of aesthetics as perception in a very passive manner. In general, I would say. So it's interesting that you were mentioning Riegel and maybe also Heidegger, that they are talking about also tactility that implies a more active relationship with objects. And I think that is really fantastic, your approach coming from just a passive contemplation to an active interaction through daily objects. And I think that is fantastic. But my question would be how to move from the general perception in general about, for instance, house chores or daily tasks that are a little bit tedious, that usually are considered as drudge labor in general, how to make it attractive to have a different attitude, to be, let's say, aesthetic beings in that sense, that we are not just the people that are involved in design or architecture, that they are configuring and designing objects that are going to be used, but how would you move from a drudge approach to an attractive one through service on daily life through objects? Right. That would be my question. Yeah, I know it's a little bit open and it's actually what you do. It's your life purpose in general, but I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, well, thank you for the first comment that I have been sort of dissatisfied with the traditional mode of aesthetic characterization, which is contemplation. So I'm sort of spectator, just looking at, whatever the object of aesthetic appreciation. But that severely limits the scope of aesthetics, because in our lives, we are always doing things. I'm speaking, I'm sitting, and I'm looking at you, and I'm interacting with Javier, and so on, and or I'm trying to work with this, and so I'm always like interacting with the world. So one point, that the first point that you made is exactly right, that I'm trying to really sort of unearth what aesthetic potentials there are in everyday life, which have not gained enough attention. Now, the more difficult question is, okay, then I'm talk about, cleaning and repairing and, laundering and so on, which are drudgery. And we, prefer not to have to do that. So how do you, sort of go from, oh, I don't want to do that, to taking more joy or pleasure? It may be too strong of a word, but I would say mindful attitude toward, doing the mundane things, the house chores, that we become more attentive to the body engagement and how the object that I'm trying to clean or wash and so on sort of responds to my, doing things with it. So I think it has to start with a kind of I don't want to sound too what's the word, self-help kind of talk, but mindfulness is really the key, being much more attentive, and then I think that we become kind of absorbed with the action in progress, rather than like trying to hasten to get to the goal, which is the washed clothes or washed dishes and so on. And I often refer to Zen Buddhism and the way in which that people, the Zen disciples, practice the enlightenment. And of course, they do meditate and they read scriptures and so on. But the most important part is really engaging in everyday activities. So in a temple, they share house chores. They cook, they wash, they clean the temple, they clean the garden, and even eating and cooking, that's, part of your practice. And so, yesterday, Carlos gave me this wonderful speech, I guess, given at this university by the founder. And that's coming from the Christian point of view. But there's a lot of, I think, overlap between that speech, which really emphasizes the world, the life on this earth, and how we should be mindful. Well, mindful, that term doesn't come up, but essentially talking about mindful and derive joy from everyday moment in life, interacting with things and people. So I think that there is I don't want to push any kind of a Buddhist or Christian, religious framework, but I think that's one way of thinking about encouraging, I guess, people to sort of re-examine the quality of their lives.
Probably I was thinking also that in your last book, I mean, the aesthetics of care, that you are moving from aesthetics to ethics, is probably part of the key is dealing with empathy, and also to care. It's always whenever you are careful, you are thoughtful, and also maybe part of doing that whenever you are empathetic and you are trying to do any of these activities, if you think in the necessities that the other person has, probably whenever you deal with objects or activities, you are going to be taking care of that. So probably maybe empathy could be a good line of
I think so.
approach.
Yes, I think that, I think many of us do practice this with a social relationship, the caring for other people. We try to imagine what the other person may be feeling, maybe needing something, and then we sort of, negotiate our social lives that way. And then sort of, well, there are two things we can do. One is that when we engage in house chores, many times we are doing it with family or housemates, not only just, for myself. And so there's that way of showing my care through washing dishes that everybody used and so on. So that's one level. The other level is that the dishes which have been serving me really well, or teacup, which have been serving me really well. And so it's a way of giving thanks back to caring for that the teacup. So yeah, empathetic way of relating, and show not simply relating, but expressing that with specific actions. I think that may be key. Yeah, practice, as people say.
There's a question over there, Abel, if you can give him the microphone.
Thank you, Saito. I think I can talk loud. I don't know. Saito, you said at the beginning the objects have heart. I suppose it's a metaphor. Well, we're not talking about objects really having a subjective life. I just don't know how to use it. I mean it. The
But it
second
was the-
is more interesting. At which point do we owe respect to the objects? In order to produce beautiful things, we need to make violence on materials, wood, metal, plastic, whatever they're made of. So I suppose there is a moment in which we're allowed to be violent, but then we owe them respect. So that's the second, maybe the first question. And the last thing, in order to defend, you say that we should treat them as they have moral status. You said, well, they shape our actions and they determine our character. Now, what is not in the group? It looks like everything that exists can fit in that category, that they shape our actions and determine our character. And the last thing,
Okay.
sorry,
That's okay.
very quickly. The knife is useful. And you said that maybe in the function is where the aesthetic value is. But aren't those two different things? Why don't we separate the aesthetic value of the knife from the function? I have a collection of coffee makers at home. All of them make coffee. All of them equally bad or equally good. But they have an aesthetic value of a different kind. And it's not about the function. Anyway, those are more or less the questions. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what I called all the questions and challenges. The object having heart. I'm not going to sort of argue for like an animistic view. I mean, some cultures definitely do believe in that, but I'm not pushing that view. But rather, my view is that it doesn't. It's not so much about, whether or not this has heart, but rather, how am I going to relate to this cup? So in a way, you could say that I'm going to treat this gently and carefully and care for it as if it has a heart. So that may be one way of avoiding the sort of charge of, strange animism or something like that from Western
And
point
there
of
is
view.
a heart behind the one that designed that cup also.
Yeah.
So the object also is an interface of hearts, at least. No?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. So okay. And the next one, the violence. Okay. So in order to make this glass, I mean, you have to have the material, and so that requires harvesting the raw material needed for the making of this glass, and you call that violence. And so this becomes a kind of environmental ethics issue about how harvesting the material, where it's going to be done, how it's going to be done, and whether or not it's necessary to be done. So those are the things which, sometimes, yes, I mean, we do need them. For example, making the medicine to save people's lives. Well, we do need them. And so for that, we may have to sort of, in a way, exploit natural material. But I think that there are, again, different ways of doing it. So that's where I would sort of distinguish between simply like unwantonly gouging earth and then getting the material, and a more careful way of getting the resources. And the last point was, and I can't remember.
¿Cuál era el tercero?
Oh, usefulness.
Function versus
The
beauty.
function. Yeah. Okay.
Function beauty.
Yeah.
But
Well, see, the functional beauty, it's really complicated in the fact that you have to have the sort of mixture or the what's the word? congruence, I guess, confluence, I guess, between the functionality, how sharply it can cut vegetables, and the way in which that it looks. That some knife may look really clumsy, but when you hold it and cut it, it works really well. Compare that with another knife, which looks really slick, and it looks as if that it's going to cut really well, and then it cuts really well. So the discussion concerning functional beauty has all these different categories of how the clumsy looking sharp knife, that has its own aesthetic value in the sense that there is a real discrepancy between what it looks like and the way in which it cuts. Well, anyway, I can't answer fully the rest of your question, but
there was another question here.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Saito. I will have a question about the reciprocity as the base of this both aesthetics and ethics, aesthetic experience. Aesthetics and ethics experience.
Yes.
Because it seems to me that it opens, this dimension of seeing aesthetic experience with this intertwined with the ethical aspect, but it doesn't exhaust the aesthetic value, even for, for example, thinking about instruments that don't take care of us at all, like weapons or instruments of torture or so, I guess we don't have that kind of care relationship with these kind of objects,
right?
Even if they can be functionally beautiful in the sense of Carlson and Paulson, because they look fit for their function.
Yes.
And in the other hand, reciprocity will leave out, for example, when you talk about how we should repair objects, because there's a positive look in the aged objects and so on. But what about the environmental considerations, of production of the objects? This is a source of ethical concern that doesn't is not covered by this reciprocity relationship. If you think it's just between the object and me or the object of the community.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I see like aesthetic value that doesn't have to do anything with that, and ethical consideration that probably don't come from that kind of reciprocity.
Okay.
You.
Whenever we talk about functional beauty, then immediately, the challenge is, okay, what do we do about torture device and weapons of mass destruction? If it functions brilliantly, does it have functional beauty? And so there are different views about it. And my view is that I think that the artifacts overall function should be something which would promote human well-being. And those which do not, like weapons and torture device, would, no matter how brilliantly it performs a function, I would hesitate to ascribe any kind of functional beauty. And all the other stuff that we use for daily, life, we can talk about the particular function of the watch, but essentially it's under the umbrella of making, promoting my functioning life. So that's how I want to sort of distinguish the two. The environmental, that's a good question, because the whole notion of repair, that is really promoting the longevity of the object, which is to reduce the production and reduce the what we throw away. So in one sense, when I repair things and try to live with it for a long term, that is not only reciprocating the service that this object has given us, but also giving thanks to everything, the background, where the material was harvested and the people's lives which are dedicated to making this watch and so on. So in one sense, I think that what reciprocity would include would have to be much larger than this particular object. Thank you. I agree with that. That's a good point.
So even though probably there are more questions, we are a little bit behind schedule. So probably we can
I
do
will
some
be
the question solving probably during the coffee break.
Sure.
And then now we are going to have a group photo of the conference, or you're welcome to join even if you're not in the conference. We are going to go to the lobby, the part of the lobby that is on top, to have a photograph with a photographer of the university. Then we are going to be receiving aesthetic indications from him.